everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I am back with another video, and this time we're going to be talking about something that's highly requested, which is the acrylic powder to liquid ratio. So a mix ratio is the amount of monomer liquid and polymer powder used to create a bead. So a bead mix ratio can be best described as either dry, medium, or wet. So what that means is that if equal amounts of liquid and powder are used to create the bead, it is called a dry bead. But if twice as much liquid as powder is used to create the bead, it is called a wet bead, which means you use more liquid than powder. And halfway between those two is a medium bead, which contains 1.5 more liquid than powder. And for the most part, when we're doing nails, that's what we really want. We want them to be medium beads. That way they're like the right amount of liquid and powder. So in general, medium beads are the ideal mix ratios for working with monomer liquid and polymer powder. So with all that being said, making sure that we have the right mix ratio would ensure that our nails, for one, set properly, and also that we get maximum durability. And a good example of not having the right mix ratio would be like making cookies. So like if you add too much flour, then the cookies will be dry and crumbly. And then if you don't add enough flour, then our cookies would be soft and gooey. So that's the same thing that would happen with nails. So we have to make sure that we have the right amount of liquid and right amount of powder. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and get to the demonstration, and I hope this video is helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate, and for that I'm going to be using my Mia's Secret acrylic system, and this is the Cover Rose acrylic powder, again by Mia's Secret. I'm also using my Mia's Secret monomer, and this is my OPI monomer warmer, and I'm using my alpha brush in a number 9. And then I'm just going to be showing you on this little practice nails whenever I pick up my beads. But like we mentioned earlier, basically we just have to make sure that we pick up the right amount of liquid and powder depending on what size bead we want. So I'm going to start off with a big bead. So for that, you dip your brush all the way in, wipe off the tip to where it's wet but not just dripping. And then that same side that we wiped off is the same side that I dip into my powder. So I'm just going to dip it in there. And we have a nice size bead. And I'm just going to apply it on the nail. And as you can see, it's not just moving all over the place, which means that it's a nice size bead. If it was too wet, it would be running all over the side of the nails. But with it just being there and keeping its shape, that means that we had a good ratio, a good consistency. So I'm just moving it around, just dabbing it down. And then I'm just going to start brushing down towards the tip. Which you guys know that is usually the same process that I do whenever I'm doing a set. So I'm just brushing it down towards the tip. Okay, and then also it's really important that you wipe your brush off as you work, because acrylic will stick to acrylic. So if I don't wipe my brush off and I keep brushing the nail or the acrylic, all of that acrylic is going to get stuck to the brush, and it's going to just keep building up and up and up until it's really impossible for you to keep working because your brush is just going to be full of acrylic. But anyways, our next bead is going to be like a medium-sized bead. So I dip my brush in. I wipe it halfway, and then I dip it into my powder. You see I have a smaller bead. So now this one I'm going to place at the very tip or right below my first one. Same thing, just patting it down and then just brushing it down towards the tip, and remembering to wipe your brush off as you go. And we're going to go ahead and blend it up as well. Just like that. So that was our second bead. So as you can see, we have a pretty good thickness. So now I'm going to go in and get a even smaller bead. So for a smaller bead, I dip my brush in. So as you guys know, the first time we only wiped the very tip, which was for a large bead. The second time we did a medium-sized bead, so we wiped it off halfway. And then for a small bead, you would wipe off your whole brush, so you're getting a lot of that liquid out. So now we're literally just going to dip the very tip of our brush in. So as you can see, we have a way smaller bead. And now we're going to place that one closer to the cuticle area. So as you can see, again, if my bead was too wet, it would be running all over the place. And of course, I'm going to show you here in a second how it should not look. So I'm just brushing it down towards the tip. And here in a second, I'll show you what it looks like from the side. It's pretty hard to tell with these practice fingers or practice nails, but we have a pretty good thickness. It's nice and smooth. And also, if you are not using the right ratio, that's when your nails are going to be lumpy, and it's going to be really hard for you to work with your acrylic. So now I'm going to show you the incorrect way of picking up a bead. So first I want to show you here on this in the powder how this bead was bigger. That one got a little bit smaller, and then the small one got even smaller. So also another thing that people do is drag. As you can see, I only just dip in there, but you could also drag. So like a big bead would be like, say, that much, and then your medium bead would be like half of that, and then a small bead would be half of the second one. Just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you again the incorrect way of doing it. So if I just dip my brush in there, not wiping it off, and just go in there and get a bead, it's going to just run all over the place once I place it down. As you can see, it's running to the side of the nail, and it's going to be dripping all over the place. And that's when you have too much liquid. As you can see, it's just all over the place. It's all over my brush. So that's what happened when you have too much liquid. So again, make sure that you dip your brush off, wipe it off, just the tip for a big bead, wipe it halfway for a medium bead, and then wipe it all the way off for a small bead. And then also, if you get a bead that's too dry, I'm going to show you now. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe all of my brush off, and I'm trying to get a big bead. So as you can see, it's really dry and it's starting to look lumpy, and then it's even going to be hard to get the acrylic off my brush. Let me see. See, like you can see how lumpy it gets, and it's pretty hard to work with. And then that's when your acrylics start to get really, really thick because it dries so fast from it not having enough liquid. So again, you want to make sure that you dip it in, wipe the tip off for a big bead, wipe the middle of the brush for a medium bead, and wipe the entire brush for a small bead. And not only does that matter, but you also have to focus on or think about the way you drag or the way you pick your bead up. So for a small bead, you literally just dip it in there. As you can see, I'm holding my brush up at a high angle. That's a small bead. I'm going to go ahead and place it right there. If I was placing a medium, if I was picking up a medium bead, I will hold my brush more at a 45-degree angle. Like that. That's a medium bead. And then if I was getting a larger bead, I would dip it in there and hold it at an even lower angle. And that's our large bead. So again, the angle in which you pick up your bead matters as well. So for a small bead, you just dip your brush in just like that. For a medium bead, you hold it at a 45-degree angle. And then for a bigger bead, then you will hold it at an even lower angle. And then I'll be showing you pictures on that as well. And that is what we picked up. So again, that's the small bead, medium bead, and the large bead. And again, I'm going to show you what happens when you pick up a bead that's too dry. So if you dip your brush in and just wipe it too much to where it's almost no liquid in there and try to pick up a bead, it's going to be absolutely way too dry. As you can see, there's still even powder on there. And then your bead is barely going to want to lay down on the nail, and then it's going to be just super lumpy. So if this is happening to you in your nail, so if your bead looks like that, then that means that you're using too much powder and not enough liquid. So you have to make sure you use a little bit more liquid. And then if your bead is super runny, like this, as you can see, even fell back in here. And that will happen. If your bead is too wet, then it's going to fall right back into your container. And then it's also going to run all over the nail, and it's going to be on your client's cuticle. So you have to keep in mind that, again, you have to wipe off your brush, and then also keep into consideration the angle in which you have to pick up your bead. So I'm going to show you again how I do it the correct way. So dip my brush in, and this is going to be for a big bead. So dip my brush in, wipe just the tip off, and then that same side that I wiped off is the same side that I dip into the powder. Place my bead. As you can see, it's holding its shape. It's not just running all over the place. I'm going to pat it down. And then I'm going to brush it down towards the tip. Just like that. My next one would be a medium-sized bead. So I dip my brush in, wipe halfway, dip that side in, place it closer to the cuticle area, place it closer to the tip, pat it down, and I'm brushing down towards the tip. And then I'm also blending it up. And I do know that I'm using too much acrylic because these nails are not that long, which is why I'm having to blend up. I'm going to go ahead and wipe the sides off, and that's really important as well, wiping the sides off. That way it doesn't take away from your shape. Now for the back, we're going to pick up a smaller bead. So we dip our brush in, wipe the whole brush off, dip it in at a high angle, placing our bead closer to the cuticle area, patting it down, and then brushing that down towards the tip and making sure that you're really gentle when you're doing this. And then our last bead would be the one right in the apex area, which is right there. And as you can see, I literally just picked up a bead and I didn't even think about it. So that's really, like, you just have to find what works for you. All brands are different. Some acrylics might be runnier than others. Some might dry a little bit faster than others. So you kind of just have to play with it and find what works for you the best and just sticking to that method, because after a while of, like, after doing this for so long, you would just pick up your bead and not even think about it. So now that we're done showing you the correct way twice, what your acrylic would look like if it's too runny and how it would look if it's too dry. And then now I'm going to show you just different pictures of how your product should look and how to know if it's okay to use it or, you know, if you need to wipe it off. So the first one would be your acrylic being the right way. So this is the correct bead ratio. So as you can see, it's shiny, it's keeping its shape, it's not falling off the brush. So that's bead number 1. Bead number 2 would be being too dry. So I wipe my brush off. And as you can see, it's really powdery and it's really lumpy and it's not as shiny. And then as you can see, it's hard to get off the brush. And then number 3 would be one that's too wet. So as you can see, it's running off the brush. It's moving as I'm turning my brush. So this one would be too wet. And then also it's hard to get off my brush. And then it's also going to be stuck all on my brush as well. So those were the 3 different beads. So one was too dry, one was too wet, and the other one was just right. And again, it is going to take a little bit of practice for you to finally, you know, get the right ratio. But as we mentioned earlier, it's really important, because if not, you will get lifting. Or also when the beads are too wet, I don't know if you ever had where you place the bead and your client might complain about it being too hot. And if you do that, it's because that means that your acrylic is too wet, so it causes that acrylic to get really, really hot, and sometimes it's uncomfortable for your client. I know I've noticed that before when I first started doing nails. Like, you would touch on the acrylic and it was not super hot, but it was like warm, and you're wondering like, dang, I wonder why it's warm. But it's because it's too wet. And then also not having the right ratio will cause lifting. So even after you prep the nail correctly and file the acrylic correctly, if you apply the acrylic too wet or even too dry, you could still get lifting. So you also have to take that into consideration. Alrighty, y'all, so I hope this video was helpful with your ratio between the powder and the liquid. So as you can see here, we have some beads that are way too wet, and then here we have one that was absolutely too dry. As you can see, there's still even loose powder on it. This one was just right, and then that one, as you can see, is still super shiny, and that one was really, really wet. Right here we had this one that was really dry. As you can see, it was really lumpy. This one was just right, and then this one was a little bit too wet where it had a ring of liquid around it. Now it kind of dried up, but it was there. And then also we had our little sample here. So the first 2 on the right were the perfect ratio. As you can see, they look flawless. They're not bumpy or anything. And then the one in the middle was with the acrylic too wet. So as you can see, it was really thin and it kind of just ran all over to the sides. And then the last one over to the left was way too dry. So it was lumpy and it was hard to brush down because it was just absolutely too dry. So I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at GetNail32. And I will see you guys next time.